We all known Dennis had less than a week, and we'd braced ourselves for all the good that would do. This was going to tear us apart, leave a ragged, gaping hole in all our lives. But that would be it. It would fit within our understanding of things that we could all assume he went wherever we thought people go. That would have been so much easier, so much less troubling than what actually happened. Dennis had been diagnosed with cancer a couple of days after his 10th birthday, and it all went downhill from there. There never was an upswing, never an opportunity for surgery. All the scans showed the same thing, the oily black webs having grown larger and denser. The fact that we were twins and had looked identical right up to when he started chemo just made it worse. There I was beside him, a perfect image of what he used to be before his hair fell out and his skin drained and his cheeks sunk down into his skull. An emaciated ghost, constantly contrasted with what he should be. And then finally the doctor shut the case, snuffed out the last wisps of hope. Dennis will most likely not last more than 4 days, a week at the most. So we'd all set up camp in this musty room at the hospital. The walls were freckled and pea green. The only light slanted in from between the shutters, glaring bars stretching out across the floor to end just short of Dennis's bed. The staff managed to bring in another, simpler bed for me, and my parents slept in old wicker chairs. Dennis looked really bad at this stage. You could as good see his skull. We all wanted to talk to him to make the most of whatever time was left. But he slept for most of the day, and when he woke up, there'd just be silence. Nobody knew what to say. There was no right words, and there was this underlying fear that the moment anybody interacted with the situation, they'd somehow make it real and it would hit everyone. The first sound would knock us all off the tightrope and we'd fall into tears and chaos and we wouldn't be able to pull ourselves back up. So there was silence, my parents occasionally forcing smiles that never made it to their eyes. The third day was when it finally happened, when the steady beeping of the heart monitor started to break down into frantic electronic wails, and Dennis began to shake feebly as a dry crackling sound rose up from his mouth. My parents exploded out of their chairs, my mother heading straight to Dennis, grabbing his shoulders and pleading at him to stop it and be all right. My father was at the door room, screaming down the hallways for help. The doctors and nurses at the hospital had changed lately. They'd started treating Dennis differently. Before the rescuations were always these frantic, desperate efforts like 100-meter sprints. There was always a desperate desire to succeed in every single moment. Now it was different, more like a steady jog. These were people who were going through the motions, ticking off things they were meant to try from little checklists in their mind. I don't think it would have made a difference either way. The cancer had finally tipped over and the system just couldn't shoulder it anymore. They called it and left, offering their condolences and saying they'd take away the body when we were ready. The door clicked behind us. Me, Mom, Dad, and Dennis's corpse. We all inched closer up to the side of his bed and just looked. My mother cracked, breaking into great howling tears. My mother pulled her close, trying to keep it together but losing it in his own way. No sobs from him, just the occasional tear running down his face and sharp breaths bursting through his clenched teeth. I was just staring at Dennis's face. We all stood there for a long time. I finally realized that this wasn't just one thing. This wasn't just a single event. For the first time, my mind started running away with itself and unfolding all the endless implications of this. Every one of them causing my gut to sink, and for me to miss him so much even though he'd just been there. I was never going to talk to him again. He was never going to laugh at me again. We were never eating dinner again. We were never going to school together again. We were never going to be in the same class in school again, or talk during classes at school again. It just kept going and going as I realized this wasn't just one person I'd lost. I'd lost a million things. Something that was meant Something that was meant to be this constant presence was gone, and nothing would ever be as good as it should be again. Everything I was going to do, everything I was going to do be soured by the certainty that I wouldn't be doing it with him, or that I wouldn't be able to tell him about it later. It had only ever been a childish assumption that any of that would happen. I was the first to see his lips quiver. Mom, Dad, his lips are moving. My parents froze, still clasped around each other, my mom curled over and supported by my father. We looked down as his lips continued to quiver. My parents went quiet again. They must have been trying to hold back hope, assuming it was some kind of nervous tic. But it kept going, and finally, in a dusty, hoarse voice so faint it was like you were hearing on the wind, he said my name. Harry. My, my father sprinted across the room, yelling for the nurses to come back. My mother was clutching her mouth and stumbling back from the bed. The workers tumbled back in and went through the checklist and shocked him with the defibrillators a few times and reached their verdict. We're sorry, he's still dead. But I heard him talk, said my father in a small, pleading voice. Look, it could have been gas escaping. But, said my father before a tiny scraping sound cut through the room, everyone turning towards its source. It was coming from Dennis, halfway between a sigh and a croak. Harry, it's so dark, so cold, so dark, and it's pulling at my insides and taking me down. A moment later, nurses started on their runs again. But this wasn't some perfunctory run through their checklist. You could see it on their faces, in how hurried their movements were. They didn't know what was happening. They weren't even sure they were doing the right thing. They moved on to the defibrillator again, sending crashing waves of power down through Dennis's chest before listening with the stethoscope. It doesn't make sense, one was mumbling. After 10 minutes, they all just stepped back. They'd run the checklist out and nothing had happened. What's happening? My mother screamed. One of the men, a doctor I think, answered. Nothing is happening. We try and pump oxygen in, and it does nothing. There's no pulse, and we can't induce one for more than a second or two. The body's temperature is down 3 degrees. He's deceased. But we heard him, I said. I know, but he's dead. The dry grating came again, and everyone shut up. Please, Harry, where are you? I walked over to his side. I wasn't relieved he was talking. I was only afraid. This was wrong. I wanted to run. I wanted him to just be gone so I could cry with my parents and be done with it. But I kept walking and put my hand on his bony, cold, and clearly dead hand. I'm here, I said. I can see gray. A little bit of gray, but it's so far away. I don't just see it. I feel it. And I never knew something could be so far away. I'm already so far down, but I need to go so much further to get to the gray. I didn't know how to respond, so I just stood there and listened to him talk about the darkness and the distant gray smudge. Sometimes he'd answer me, sometimes he wouldn't. A lot of stuff happened around me in the next few hours. Everyone who worked at the hospital must have been in and out. Even my parents started to leave sometimes when they accepted I was the only one Dennis seemed aware of. Dennis was looked at by every type of doctor they had in there, and nobody understood. They started moving him around on a stretcher, taking him to equipment they couldn't just bring to him. I had to come along. I was the only one who could keep him talking. It was a long time before anything was turned up. They'd finally gotten desperate and had put Dennis in the fMRI machine. They'd fully prepped a corpse and put it in the machine for a living. My entire family was in the room. A cold, confused fear had settled in my gut, making me feel a little bit like throwing up. I think we've got something, said the technician who was looking at the monitors. Please tell us what's happening, said my mother. She'd moved past terror and hope and now above all else exhausted, her red face slack and empty. Look, this scan looks for where the blood is in the brain. Well, the thing is that none of the blood in the brain is moving. We know that from his pulse, but something is happening there. Something the machine can only pick up a little, but there is some kind of activity. Now, I can't be sure, but I think the activity is clustered around some of the parts that control movement. Everything else is totally dead. He's obviously conscious, he's using complete sentences, but what? Said my father. But it's like whatever's doing the talking is somewhere else, still interacting with the stuff that does the talking. That's exactly right, came a voice behind us. I looked over my shoulder and saw an old man in a gray business suit. He had a well-trimmed silver beard and was all around a strange contrast to the clumsy chaos that engulfed the hospital. "Who are you?" said the technician. "I'm Daniel Cohen," he said, handing the technician a crisp business card. "I'm with the Orpheus Institute. We're a semi-private medical research body, and we've dealt with a few cases similar to this one. The hospital president has already agreed to let us look into this." Almost invisibly, a number of men moved in behind Cohen and were now making their way over to the technician. "These men will help explain the confidentiality situation surrounding issues like this. We'll handle the boy from here." More men. These ones in pure white scrubs that had a strange logo on the left breast. Got Dennis back on the stretcher and led us all into the hallway. We followed wordlessly, never thinking to say anything, because at least these new people represented new possibilities, a completely new road that might lead to an explanation. They rolled Dennis into an operating theater, and my mother gasped. "Look, just what are you doing?" said my father in a husky voice that made it obvious he was still holding in tears. Cohen's, who had been striding ahead of the stretcher with a speed that belied his age, had stopped once we got to the theater and was now taking deliberate care to look all three of us in the eyes. We were still in the hallway, the operating theater door shut beside us. We answered in a low, comfortable tone. He answered in a low, comfortable tone. "We're not performing surgery. It's just the quietest parts of the hospital, and there's no distractions in there. We want nothing more than to understand what has happened to your son. This sort of thing has happened before. Your son is conscious, and as we understand, he will only talk to his brother here. We want to use Harry to ask Dennis our questions. We believe this would work best if he and Harry were alone. We've got the theater wired so that we can hear the answers." My parents didn't say anything for a while. My father broke the silence with weak, staggered words. "Do you think he might come back? I know that even if he does, it won't be for long, but I'd really like him back, for however long. I didn't say enough. I wasn't big enough to say the things we had to say to each other. If such a thing is possible, I swear we will do everything in our power to make it happen. We've prepared a private waiting room for you two." Cohen's gestured down the turn in the hallway. There were two people in the white scrubs standing there. "Pete and Shirley will lead you to there, if you would please go with them." My parents began to shuffle down the corridor, my mother still buried in my father's side. My father kept throwing looks back over his shoulder at me like he was afraid I'd vanish. Soon they were gone, and I felt Cohen's hand come down on my shoulder. I turned around to him, and he knelt down so we were closer to being level. "I know this is very hard on you. I know this must be the worst day of your life, but do you think you're up to a quick history lesson?" I couldn't bring myself to answer properly, but some curiosity managed to rise through the delirium and shock, and I nodded. Cohen smiled. "One of the most significant moments in human history was the moon landing, and it's not even the fact itself that makes it so important. It's that we had contact with them the whole time they were up there. They were sending radio signals back to Earth and could be talked to. Do you think the moon landing would be what it is today if we didn't have that kind of connection to our men as they strode the unsettling and inhospitable surface of a place we were never meant to have knowledge of?" What if they'd just gone up and never came back? What if we knew for sure they'd gone up there, but had no signal from them? I was still quite out of it, so I can't quite, so I can't say I was properly digesting all of this. I slurred out, I don't know. They didn't know if they could get the astronauts back. It was a very real possibility that they'd be left to die up there, stranded, yet they still did it. It didn't matter if the mission was a failure. It didn't matter if there was no triumphant return. Do you know what mattered? What mattered more than anything was speaking to them while they were up there, to have that connection to three brave men in the void, describing man's first steps into the unknown. If they'd never come back, it wouldn't have changed anything. As long as we down here managed to make that connection to the beyond, as long as we down here, for however long had men up there, men to describe the soil, men to explain the feeling of being so light, men to tell us what the earth looked like, cut in half by the lunar horizon, men to teach us about a new world. His hand tightened on my shoulder. None of that would have been possible without the people in Houston, without the men who talked to the astronauts, kept them focused, made sure we got the information we needed. Harry, we believe Dennis is in a very strange place that humanity would do well to learn about. You are Houston, and your brother is an astronaut. He pulled a laminated sheet out from under his lapel. Here's a sheet with some topics you should focus on, and questions you should ask. This should help you get the most useful and needed information. But the most important thing is to keep him talking. Should he stop talking for 5 seconds, and you could lose him. I accepted the card, having given up on reaching a decent understanding of the situation. He ushered me into the operating theater and shut the door behind me. I was alone, and the only sound an almost inaudible ringing that emanated from the mass of stainless steel racks and implements, the cold, sturdy operating table Dennis was lying on. I approached the table, and in need of any sort of guidance, I looked at the laminated sheet. General principles. Try to keep your loved one, the subject, unaware of their deceased state. Past experience suggests that the shock may cause disconnection. Maintain constant conversation, as this has been shown to help maintain the connection. Do not ask leading questions such as whether your loved one, the subject, is having experiences in line with your own religious beliefs. First step. Ask your loved one, the subject, to describe their experience and/or surroundings. Encourage them to be as... A gasp pulled my attention away from the sheet. Harry, Dennis said. Yes, it's me, I answered, grabbing his hand. There was no doubt that he was really was dead. The hand was ice cold, and the fingers had locked in place at odd angles with rigor mortis. His entire body had gone from the sickly white of the dying to the rain-cloud shade of the dead. I got to the to the ground, come down easy like a leaf, cold. I'm standing there now. Dennis, can you describe where you are? It's still gray, but it's more real now. Solid. Gray sand underneath, gray ocean behind me, gray clouds above. Don't remember going through the clouds, but they're there now. The clouds, they're screaming. In ocean? I said. Can you see anything in the ocean? Dennis took in a phlegmy, pointless breath. Far away, the horizon, it gets dark. Dark, hungry line where even clouds stop moving, where everything stops. Darkness is clawing, moving like it's alive. Miles and miles of angry, hungry dark. Can't go there, can't go that way. At this point, I lost the thread of the exchange as perspective suddenly hit. All the things I didn't understand, and the fact that whether Dennis he wasn't alive. I broke, crying and wailing and digging my face into his bare, emaciated ribs, cold like meat straight out of the fridge. I kept squeezing his hand, harder and harder, pushing the stiff fingers closer together. Dennis, please come back. Please, wherever you are, you just come back. Harry? Harry, are you crying? It's hard to tell. So much here already sounds like crying. His words struck me deep enough to make my sobs catch in my throat, and I just started looking at it again, settling back to my previous catatonic distance from what was happening. I can't come back. No getting back. Like spilling something on the ground. No getting it all back inside and right again. It took a few seconds to force myself to accept this, but I carried on, hoping that maybe I could steer him towards some sign that he was wrong. What's in the other direction, away from the ocean? That's the way I have to go. If I try and swim, the darkness will tear me up, shred away everything until only my pain is left, and it'll toss that into the clouds, and I'll scream. Dennis, tell me what's in the other direction. Just the sand, the gray sand, on and on. Not many bad things yet, not many bad things to see yet. There'll be more when I get where I'm going. I'm going to start walking now, Harry. Where are you meant to be going? I said. I'd start digging my nails anxiously into his forearm. There was something nauseatingly, dreadfully true about everything he was saying. It was like the first time you learn the world is round, and it feels weird for the first few seconds, but soon you get used to the idea and you don't see it. You don't see it's the truth. That's the big secret. It doesn't matter how flat the ground feels. It doesn't matter how little sense it makes. It's true. And he just kept talking. I can see another person. Can you talk to them? I said, trying to keep my voice steady, feeling like I shouldn't be the one who couldn't keep it together. I suppose I could, but I can't. What do you mean? It's just not a talking kind of place. We were supposed to have done all our talking before we came here. Now we should just keep quiet. But you're talking to me, Dennis. But my voice isn't here. My voice is all the way up there with you. Dennis, I said, now squeezing my eyes to force the tears back in. Dennis, please tell me what's happening. I think I finally died, and what's happening now is what happens next. The thing that was always going to happen next. It feels right in a scary way. It's been expecting me for so long, since before I was even a fuzzy little thing that might happen, since before our parents and their parents, and so far back it's been expecting me. Please stop talking like that. You don't talk like that, you never have. Sorry. You just sort of see things different here. Some things you know without ever being told. Some things you forget. I couldn't think of anything to say and started to worry, remembering that if I left the pauses too long, he could stop answering. Hey, said Dennis, and the edges of his mouth strained out, awkwardly imitating a smile. I can see a few more people, and they're all naked, but really naked. Their clothes are off, and they're all gray and wrinkly, but that's not it. You can kind of see inside them, like all the balls have fallen down, and you can see who they are, all their thoughts and feelings just kind of hanging around them, like ghosts. It's like someone pulled the clothes off their whole past. They're so naked, Harry. He made a light coughing sound that was meant to be a laugh. That's really scary. Oh, I thought you might have thought it was funny. I don't think we're going to laugh at the same stuff anymore. I think you're different now. I guess that makes sense. So what are all the people doing? Most of them are moving, same direction as me, toward the center. The center of what? It's just called the center. The center of this place. Maybe the center of everything. But I said, starting to lose control. Why do you have to go? I don't have to. Nobody has to, just like you don't have to shake someone's hand when they put it out, or answer them when they talk to you. But it would feel wrong not to. It's what you're meant to do, and there's not any other good options. You don't want to stand still. What what happens when you stand still? Depends. A few days ago I passed this woman. A few days? I said, gripping the cold steel of the operating table as I was filled with an eerie sense of vertigo. You haven't been dead for even a day. I passed her a few days ago, he said, carrying on like he hadn't heard me. She didn't reach the center. She she just sat down, started going her own way. She's pulled one side of her rib cage out, and it's all stretched, spreading up to her left so high, stretching out the arm, grabbing its corner. Most of her skin started to get hard and flaky like old wood, or crumbling stone. I could see herself. Musician. Liked music. Kind of thought of life like a song. Sometimes it repeated itself. Some bad notes here and there, but it was pulling itself together. She was reaching the chorus and it ended. It was over so fast and she can't accept it. She's picked this sharp rock off the ground and she's scraping it past her ribs like a huge harp or something angry, trying to make music, keep the song going. But it's an awful sound. Sawing bones, never going to replace what should have come next. She's already grown into the ground. She's going to be here forever, trying to make the music she missed out on. There was nothing to say that, so I just went quiet for a while, assuming he'd keep talking. He didn't. Dennis? Dennis? No answer. A terrified jolt ran through me and I started slamming my fist onto his chest. Dennis, come back, Dennis! A growl tore out of his mouth and his frame thrashed upwards, causing me to jump back and tumble down onto the floor, smashing into surgeon shells and causing gleaming surgical instruments to rain down around me. I didn't have time to think before I forced myself up again and bent over the operating table to stare desperately into my brother's eyes. I took his hand again, squeezing it as hard as I could.